Opening Daf Yomi, we just were talking about the laws of swimming in Shabbos. Basically, it's mutter to swim if it's in a private domain. If you have a private pool that's surrounded by walls, some sort of eruv, partition, then it's possible to permit the swimming. There's a problem of transferring from domain to domain, etc. So that problem would be solved if it's in the private domain. Amar Rabbi Zera, and then we're on Mem Aleph, Amud Aleph at the top. Amar Rabbi Zera, Ana chazitzi l'Rabbi Abahu sheheniach yadav keneged panav shel matzah, v'lo yidana I naga lo naga. So Rabbi Zera was going. This is not on Shabbos. This is Rabbi Zera saw Rabbi Abahu, who he was going to wash, going into a river, and he said he put his hands down below, covering his member. You didn't know if he actually touched his member, if he didn't touch it. Shita de lo naga. Clearly, he didn't touch it. The Tanya, Rabbi Eliezer Omer Kol Ochez Ba'ama Omashtin Ki'ilu Mevi Mabul Lo'olam. Because clearly he didn't touch it based on the Braita that Rabbi Eliezer says that anybody who holds onto his member and urinates, it's as if he brings the flood to the world. So, Amar Abaye Asua Voleshet. Abaye says, he made it like a boleshet. Now, what's a boleshet? Boleshet is a word for soldiers. Soldiers are coming to attack a city. So he brings a parable. Not an example, a parallel example. It's an boleshet shenichnesah le'ir b'shat shalom chaviyot ptuchot asurot stumot mutarot. It's a parallel example of a case where when you have soldiers coming into a city. If it's at a time of peace, then any open barrels are forbidden and the closed barrels are permitted. The open barrel, we're talking about non-Jewish soldiers who are not, or Jewish soldiers not keeping the Torah, I suppose, in modern times. If the soldiers come into the city and the wine barrels are open, then you figure that they're going to go to the wine barrels and they're going to drink, they're going to touch the wine, rendering the wine yayin nesach, and forbidding the wine. So, if it's a time of peace, you assume that they're going to do that. In the time of war, the open barrels are going to be rendered prohibited, and the closed barrels are going to continue to be mutter. In the time of peace, we're talking about. But in the time of war, the open barrels, that both of them will be permitted. Why would the open barrel even be permitted in a time of war? Because you wouldn't have time to go. He wouldn't actually go and drink from the wine. So the point being that because the soldier is afraid of at a time of war that the defending soldiers are going to come, and he's afraid for his life, so he's not going to waste his time having a sip of wine. Here too, when a man is going to bathe in a river, he's made, there's slippery rocks, there's a fast current, whatnot. His mind is on his safety rather than perhaps on untoward thoughts. So the whole thing about the bringing the flood to the world was that we know from our tradition that just before the great flood in the Noah's Ark story, that there was a tremendous amount of licentiousness in the world. The lion was lying down with the lamb. Even members of different species were cohabiting. There was a lot of homosexuality, a lot of licentiousness, heterosexual licentiousness. People were doing it with trees. There was a lot of masturbation going on. So we're talking. So what's the big deal? So what? So what? So if somebody's masturbating and having sex with 10 women, or homosexuals, or doing with animals, or animals lying down with different animals, so what? Well, apparently, in terms of this mythological or perhaps historical level, and mythology has a real element to it in terms of the inner world. That clearly when this kind of thing happens, then God gets ticked off. He turns into Dirty Harry and he takes revenge, right? So a macho God with a personal sense of justice. So no, it's not our. We don't understand, right? But we know, we see there's tremendous. We look at the civilizations in Greece and Rome, tremendous amount of licentiousness. The civilizations went down. They lost themselves to madness and rampant venereal diseases. So Judaism is about modesty. Judaism is about. So the idea is that one would even prevent touching himself. So if he's a single, the case we're talking about here is a single man. If a man is married and he has an outlet for his physical desires, then it's not going to be such an issue if he happens to touch himself. Then he won't start thinking, I'll touch himself again. So, but if for a married man it's not an issue. I don't know. I didn't see the Mefarshim on this, but perhaps Rabbi Bahu was married, so it wasn't an issue. So Gemara continues. But in terms of a sense of modesty and a sense of getting away from something that would cause a physical desire, that the sages in the Talmud recommended even avoiding touching down in that area unless it's absolutely necessary. Even when somebody necessary, when somebody's urinating, so it's permitted to hold, or a man to hold his member while he's urinating. However, he doesn't want to get the piss all over the place, right? So, however, we pride ourselves in our Hasidim, where it's going the extra mile, even though it's not required. A Hasid, what's a Hasid? He does above and beyond what's requested from him by the law. So a big Hasid will actually urinate without holding his member. Now, this is a little hard on the cleaning lady. If his aim is a little wayward, so I wouldn't. So to be a big chassid and actually make a big mess for the cleaning lady, or whoever is responsible for it, or there's a bad smell when you come in the bathroom. I think that's called chassidut shel shtut. That's a nonsense form of chassidut. You can of course ask your rabbi, but of course your rabbi will give you the wrong answer. Anyhow, so, or not. So, we continue. Kevan Davite lo menasche, v'achanami kevan David lo at laharhure. So, Rabbi Bahu, if he was single and if it was an issue where he so much as touches his member that he's going to get a big thought, oh my God, I got to have something, right? So then, so it's not an issue. It's not an issue. Why? Because he's fearing for his life. Because there's a big current of water going down. He's not going to run behind the bushes and all of a sudden. No. He's got it. He's thinking. His mind is on other things. So anyhow, talking about a Talmudic master here, a little honor, a little kavod. Okay, so. V'yututa denara. Is it really so that he's afraid of the water? Va'amar Rabbi Abba Amar Rav Huna Amar Rav Kol hamaniach yadav keneged panav shel mata ki'ilu kofer b'brito shel Avram Avinu. Our sages teach us that anybody who's touching his member, it's as if he is denying the very covenants that God made with Abraham, the covenants with the Jews. Lo kasha, haki nachet, haki saleh. So, And again, mind you that we're not even talking about masturbation. We're talking about simply he's covering his pubic area. He's covering his privates. So you could, out of modesty. But that very act of touching could be problematic for a number of people. So lo kashe haki salik. But it's not a difficulty here. When it's permitted when somebody is going into the river, and then he doesn't have to bother covering because he's fearing for his life. But when he comes out of it, he would cover up for modesty. Ki ha de Rava Shafir. So for modesty's sake, it's a good thing, right? Like it's the custom of Rava. When Rava was undressed, when he was naked, he would actually bend over, so it's out of modesty. Ilo Rabbi Zera Zakif. In other words, so when Rava would come out of the river, for instance, he would bend down a little bit and he'd cover up his privates of his hands so people didn't see, out of modesty. Rabbi Zera, however, when he came out of the river, he would actually stand straight up. And not cover, because he didn't want people to think. Rabbi Zera was saying he didn't want people to think he's touching himself. And he didn't want people to think that he was ashamed of the covenant we made with Abraham. So in a dignified way, he would just stand up straight and walk out of the river. Rabbanan Dve Rav Ashi Kika Nachte Zakve Kika Salke Shach. The sages of the academy of Rav Ashi, when they would go into the river, they would actually stand up straight. And when they would come out of the river, they would be bent over a little bit and perhaps covering themselves out of modesty. Rabbi Zera Havaka Mishtamet Midrav Yehuda Devai Lemesak La'arad Yisrael. Now here's the Zionist, anti-Zionist piece in the Gemara. Rabbi Zera eventually he emigrated from Babylonia to the land of Israel, changed his name from Zera to Ze'ira. Ze'ira means small, in the sense Eretz Canaan also means to be subdued, in the sense that that's the whole point of the land of Israel, to humble a man. It humbles a man to be in the presence, of course, as we know, the greatest Torah scholars in the world are in the land of Israel today, so that the people who come here to study Torah, no matter how great they were outside of Israel, they are humbled by the greatness of the Torah scholars in the land of Israel. Ki mitzion tetzeh Torah adavar Hashem Yerushalayim. For the Torah comes out of Zion and the Word of God from Jerusalem. And so Rabbi Zera changed his name to Ze'ira, small. He was humbled by not only the greatness of Rabbi Yochanan in the tradition of Rabbi Yochanan in Tiberias, but also the very land of Israel has a power to. It says Eretz Yisrael b'Yisurin nikneh. The land of Israel is acquired through difficulties, through suffering. It's a hard place to live, even in the modern world. And sitting on the rivers of Babylon, eating dates with the big civilization, and sitting in the plush life in Manhattan or Los Angeles is one thing, but living in a small apartment in the land of Israel and having to make do with very little, which is somewhat valued in Jerusalem. Jerusalem is a poor city with a lot of rich people living in it, but it is a poor city. One of the least developed of the modern cities in the Middle East. So, perhaps the world. So, it's a difficult place to live. So, perhaps the very difficulties were another way why Rabbi Zera changed his name. And there's another meaning of Eretz Canaan, of Kni'ah, of subduing and submission. So, submission before the one and only. The presence of God is very apparent in the land of Israel. And when one feels the presence of God, one feels subdued and submitted before the will of God. So here Rabbi Zera in the story, he was trying to evade Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Zera wanted to emigrate to the land of Israel. The Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Kol ha'oleh miBavel la'eretz Yisrael over ba'aseh. Because Rav Yehuda, if I said Rabbi Yehuda, I'm wrong, it's Rav Yehuda, he was Babylonian. So Rav Yehuda said anybody who moves from Babylonia to the land of Israel is violating the Torah, as it is written, Babela Yuva V'Sama V'Shama Iyu. They have been brought to Babylon, and there they shall be, in the book of Jeremiah. Amar Ezil Eshma Mine Milta. So Rabbi Zera, again, he says Rabbi Zera because eventually he would be a sage of the land of Israel, which they gave the title Rabbi, with the Yud. And Rav Yehuda, it says Rav, it signifies a Babylonian sage, a sage from outside of the land of Israel. So perhaps he's called Rabbi here on the future when he would leave. So anyhow, so he said, wait a second, even though I don't want to get in trouble with Rav Yehuda, because he had, for his reasons, he says not to move to Israel, he's a great Torah scholar, a great sage, and I want to go hear his words of Torah. So he went, I'm going to go hear what he says. Ete ve'esak. Azal ashkeche dekai be'banai, v'ka'amar le'shame, haviu li nete. So Rabbi Zera went to Rav Yehuda, and he saw that he happened to be in the bathhouse. And he said, Rav Yehuda said to his attendant, bring me netzer, something similar to soap that they used to use for washing. Haviuli masrek, he said, bring me a comb. Pitchu, and then he said these two things, in the bathhouse. And then the third thing he said was, Pitchu pumaychu v'apeku havla v'ishtu mimaya dve bane. And then he said to attendants, open up your mouths, and exhale, and then drink from the water of the bathhouse. Now that's nasty. Drink from bathhouse water? I mean, give me a break. You go to the mikveh, you drink from mikveh water? That's one of those jokes they make in yeshiva. Go drink mikveh water. One of those. Come on. Ever seen the color of some of those mikvehs? It's chocolate mikveh, for crying out loud. What are you going to drink from the mikveh? So where does Rabbi Abahu get off telling him to drink bath water for? What is this? Anyhow, okay, it was a different world back then. We don't know the status of the bathhouses and the water. Perhaps it was a natural spring water that was flowing. Let's try to understand what it's saying here rather than imposing our own understanding upon it. Amar ilema lobati ila lishmoa davar zed dai. So Rabbi Zera said, if I only came to hear these things from him, it would have been enough. And if only I came to hear that made my whole day, my whole week, my whole life. So, Bishlama haviyu neter haviyu masrek. Clearly we understand why it was important for Rabbi Zera to come hear Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Zera came to hear Rav Yehuda say, in the bathhouse, bring me the soap, bring me the netter, exactly, something similar to soap, and bring me the comb. He said them in Hebrew, so we understand the law now that this is the way it's permitted to use the Hebrew language in the bathhouse for mundane purposes, like bring me this, bring me that. So what is this thing about exhaling? Apparently exhaling, it was something that was good for the body, for sweating. So this is according to the system of Shmuel. Havla mapek havla. It says, breath brings out breath. The breath that goes in through the mouth causes the sweat to go out quicker. So perhaps he goes like that. If he inhales, exhales it 3 times quickly, that might. He's claiming. Rav Yehuda claimed that this would actually speed up the sweating process. And there may be a biological basis for it. So what's so great about drinking bathhouse water? It's thought if somebody eats and they didn't drink, then his food turns into blood, and this is the beginning of stomach ailments. So let's, before we get into all the details there, let's go back to the subject of moving to Israel. Aliyah Mebavel. Rav Yehuda, his opinion is brought in Masechet Ketubot, and there he explains that the obligation of the Babylonian Jews not to go to Israel during the Second Temple period, and it started during the Second Temple period, and they had to remain there. The Babylonian Jews were in there from after the destruction of the First Temple. Then the Jews were exiled to Babylonia, to the east. Israel and Babylonia were right next to each other, separated by just a little bit of desert. And the desert never stopped the Jews, did it? So, furthermore, there was a feeling that the Babylonia, there's one opinion that Babylonia is considered a part of the land of Israel, because the biblical borders of the land of Israel go to the Tigris and Euphrates River. Therefore, they were in Israel, so to speak, at least in the biblical or the future borders of Israel. It says in the Bible, I believe it, and that settles it. So why did Rabbi Zera feel a need to move to Israel? Because he thought this verse from Jeremiah, wherein it is written, Bavel yuvau v'shama yiyu, they are brought to Babylon and there they shall be. According to Rabbi Zera, this verse it doesn't actually teach a prohibition of Jews from moving from Babylonia back to Israel. Some say that verse has to do with non-Jews, and not about the Jewish people. That verse is referring to non-Jewish people. But still, Rabbi Zera was afraid that why didn't Rabbi Zera want to go see Rabbi Yehuda? He says, so so he finds out, Rabbi Zera, you're actually moving to Israel, and then he would say, even though before he goes and says it, then Rabbi Zera could go, because he interprets it differently. But when the great Rav Yehuda says specifically to him, you are not allowed to go to the land of Israel, then Rabbi Zera is in a problem. So this reminds me of today, like everything does. Also reminds me of tomorrow. Forget it. So it reminds me of today, where a man came up to Rav Brandwein, and he said we were all sitting around the table, and he said, he was this American religious guy, and he said, I would love to move to Israel. Rav Brandwein lives in Jerusalem, and so he's visiting in Jerusalem with the great Rav, great Hasidic Rebbe, and he says, the American says, I'd love to move here, but in consultation with the Ger Rebbe, or what he meant was he heard from the Ger Rebbe secondhand. I really don't know. Mentioned the Ger Rebbe's name, and he said that an unusual amount of Americans religious Americans come to Israel. He said a lot of the children don't keep the Torah.
So I could not, as often I could not hold back, and I took out a double-barreled shotgun and I shot this chassid between the eyes, and there was blood all over the place. Well, not exactly. I bit his head off, and I chewed it up and spat it out all over the place. What kind of a chutzpah do you have to say that people coming to move to Israel, religious American families, that their children don't keep the Torah? So he can stay in Borough Park, and he can stay in Williamsburg, sucking on their cholents and drinking their friggin' ginger kale, and not come to Israel. A pox on their house to say that people coming to Israel, that their children don't keep the Torah. The Americans who come to Israel and they keep the Torah, if they keep the Torah with love in the land of Israel, their children will also keep the Torah. And thank God they're not going to be these Haredi fops, these dullards who don't have a brain and don't think. They're going to actually not only be keeping the Torah, but they're going to be building the land of Israel, which is the only land we were given in the whole entire world. And they can hang out there on the street, slugging their kaporas in Williamsburg or in the Upper West Side, hanging out with all the girls in the Karlbach Shul, or whatever they do. I guess that was 20 years ago. I don't know where the pickup scene is today, but they can have their tefillin dates. And tefillin date, that's in this New York phenomenon among religious Jews, where they go and they're taking a date, and you might want to take your tefillin because you might sleep over, kind of thing. Or they could move to Israel and really see God and really learn Torah and really fulfill the Jewish destiny. So that's just a few words. So back to health advice. Tanya, achal v'lo shita achilato dam tfilat choli me'ayim. Eating without drinking is very bad for the gut. Achal v'lo halach arba amot achilato markevet v'zeu tfilat reach ra. If somebody eats and doesn't take a walk at least 2 meters afterwards, moving the body a little bit, they said that the food would rot and that would start the beginning of a bad smell. He'd become a smelly person. So people just eat and sit and digest and burp, but they don't actually get up and move around. They're smelly. So hanitzrach lenekavav achal dome letonor shesikua al gabei efro v'zeu tchilat reach zuhama. If somebody, let's say he needs to go to the bathroom, and instead of going to the bathroom, he eats, that's very bad, and it's compared to somebody who just raked out instead of cleaning out the oven, if you used to put wood in the wood stove, right? You got a wood stove, the wood is burned down to ash, and he just, instead of cleaning out the old ash, he just throws in more wood to burn more, and it clogs up the stove, and it clogs up the body. And that's the beginning of a really bad smell. It's not just a reach ra, it's a reach zuhama, contamination, it's a bad body odor and bad breath and stinky feet and stinky ears and everything. So I won't get into all the details. The Gemara doesn't, so kal v'chomer I shouldn't, right? So, and here we get to the point about why he said to drink. Remember back 100 years ago when we heard that Rav Yehuda said to drink the hot water from the bath? So he says if somebody washed in hot water, but he didn't drink hot water, drink from the waters he bathed in, it's similar to a stove that was it was heated up on the outside, but it wasn't heated up on the inside. What's it going to do? So still, I'm sorry, I'm very uncomfortable with the idea of drinking bath water, but
I'm not going to, I'm not going to impose my cultural relativism. I'm allowing for cultural relativism. I'm not going to impose my modern standards of hygiene and what's proper on a 2,000-year-old document. In other cultures and other places in the world, they did the most god-awful things. The only reason why you'd hate this statement is because either it's Jews or rabbis or it's the Talmud. So as opposed to those wonderful customs that they're doing in Africa with mud. Anyhow, so if somebody washed in hot water and he didn't rinse off with cold water afterwards, it's similar to somebody who if you're making a metal vessel like a knife or a sword or something, you fire it on the forge, it gets red hot, right? And then you have to temper the metal. Tempering the metal, you take it and you put it in cold water. If you didn't put it in, if you just let it cool off, then the metal is softer, it's not as strong. If the tempering the metal by having it red hot and then putting it into the cold water, that strengthens the metal. So they're saying it's the same thing with the body. Domeh l'mayim al gabei chavit. Rachatz v'lasach. If somebody washed, rachatz v'lasach domeh l'mayim al gabei chavit. Somebody washed and he didn't anoint himself afterwards. It's like just water that's on the barrel and hadn't actually the water is on top of the barrel, but hasn't actually gone into the barrel. The next Mishnah says, Muliar hagaruf v'shotin hemenu b'shabbat, antichi muliar hagaruf shotin hemenu b'shabbat. If the muliar, it's a vessel, it's like a big metal urn that you put water in it, and surrounding it is another vessel that you put coals in it. That's called a muliar. If you had raked the coals out of the vessel, the part of the vessel that holds the coals, surrounding it from the outside, then it's okay to drink from it on the Sabbath. Antichi af al pi shegrufa en shotin mimenu. An antichi was another kind of vessel to hold, perhaps of metal. I suppose it could be made of clay, or stone, where the water is put in the upper chamber, and below the chamber for the water, there's a place to put coals. So the difference is the muliar had the coals surrounding it from the outside, surrounding the vessel for the water, and the antichi has the coals below and directly underneath in a compartment for the coals to heat up the water above, in the compartment above. So it's permitted to drink from a muliar whose coals had been swept out. But an antichi, even though the coals had been swept out, you cannot drink from it. The Gemara explains, Hechidami muliar hagaruf. So what's a muliar that had the coals swept out of it? Tana, mayim mibifnim v'gechalim mibachutz. So with a muliar, like I said, the water's on the inside and the coals are on the outside. Antichi, Rabba Amar be kire. Antichi said it's like a kira. It's a kira. That is to say, with a kira kind of stove, there's we're talking about a vessel where the very walls are hollowed out to hold water. So you can imagine a square, a rectangular or square vessel with thick walls, and it's not thick because the walls are hollow and the water is inside those walls,
And in the middle, surrounding, you could put coals in, like a little courtyard type place in the middle. And that little area would have coals in it, and then the walls would be hollowed out walls that would have water in them, and the water would heat up. So that's Beit Kireh. Aval Beit Dude lo. But a Beit Dude would be a vessel that's made from two urns that were placed one on top of the other. The lower urn would have coals in it, and the upper one would have water, like the yes. So again, it's permitted if the coals are swept out. If it's the previous one I mentioned, where you have the hollow walls with the water in it and the coals in the central area heating up those walls, that's permitted. But if the coals are below and the water is above, even if it's swept out, you still can't use it. Why not? So depending on how the form is it, you have a different halachic conclusion. Tanya Kavated Rav Nachman. According to the system of Rav Nachman, Antichi Afal Pisha Grufa Ketuma, and Antichi, even though it is swept out and the ashes are placed on the ashes are placed on the hot coals, Ein Shotin Himenu Mipnei Nechushta Mechamamta. You still can't. Even if it is swept out or the ashes are placed, you still can't drink from it. Why? Because, again, with the bottom of it is still heating it up. It's apparently with that structure of the antichi, if you have the coals below and the water above, then even if the coals are swept out of it, it generates enough heat that would still make a problem for the water above. Next Mishnah. Hamecham shepinahu lo yiten letocho tzonen bishvil sheyechamu, aval notenhu letocho o letocho kos kedei lahavshiran. Something that you hold hot water in, a hot water urn that had been dumped. The water had been we're just going to translate it like this: the hot water urn that had been removed. The Gemara is going to discuss what pinahu really means, removed. One cannot, in such a case, with this urn that had undergone removing, you can't place cold water in it because that cold water is going to heat up. Aval notenhu letocho o letocha kos kedei lahavshiran. But you can put water inside it, or in a cup that had hot water in it. You can put cold water in it, in the mecham, in the urn, or you can put, if you have an urn with hot water in it, right? You can put cold water in it, according to the Mishnah, or what that exactly means we'll see. Or if you have a cup of hot water, you can put cold water into that cup in order to take off the chill of the cold water, or to cool off the hot water. So heating up is one thing, so now we're talking about cooling off. What do you want to cool off hot water? Can you do it on Shabbos? The Gemara will discuss. Maika Amar. What are we talking about? Amar Rav Adabar, not Matana Hachikama. Rav Adabar Matana says, this is what we're talking about. Mecham shipina mimenu mayim chamin, lo yiten letochan mayim mu'atin kedei sheyechamu, aval noten letochan mayim rubim kedei lahavshiran. He says that an urn of hot water, where the water had been poured out of it. There's hot water in an urn, you poured it out. You can't place a little bit of water in it, so that because the urn would still be hot, and that would heat up the cold water that would be cooking. But if you put a lot of cold water in, it's actually going to create it from change the status from cold water to tepid or lukewarm water. And that's not cooking. Hello, mitzaref. But the problem is you got this hot metal urn. The water had just been dumped out of it, right? So putting cold water is like tempering. It's like tempering metal, which is strengthening the metal, like we discussed earlier. Rabbi Shimon but this is according to the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon said that if something you don't intend for a certain action, then it's permitted. In other words, it's not if there's an action that you're not sure it's going to happen or not. In other words, for instance, in our case, when you put the cold water in, will it actually temper the metal or will it not temper the metal? Is it cold enough? Is the metal hot enough? Is it thick enough? What kind of metal is it? There's enough questions about whether it's actually will have the effect of the prohibition. If you're going to you don't want to temper the metal. It's not you have no desire to temper metal. Your desire is actually to cool off, or to change the temperature of the water from cold to lukewarm. So that's your intention. If there is a possible byproduct of this intention of tempering the metal, then according to Rabbi Shimon, that is permitted. And according to the halacha, it's also permitted. If there's not certain, if there may or may not be a violation of the Sabbath that was not intended as a result of your action that is permitted, your action, what you want to do is a permitted action, and there's a possible byproduct of prohibition happening of itself, but not through your own desires. Then that's called devar she'eino mitkaven, and it's mutar. If it's a psik resha, however, if there is a certain, if it is clearly a certainty that even though you're doing a certain action, such as you want to throw out water, right? You want to throw out water into the backyard, right, over the grass. So you throw the water. You don't want the water on your porch or in your house, so you throw it out the window onto the grass. The problem with this is you are certainly going to cause the grass to grow. Grass drink water. Grass grow. There's no question about it. So that's called a psik resha. The classic example of this is with the chicken and the children. The children need to play, right? So you just happen to have this chicken, so you cut its head off, right? And what all you want to do is give the kids a chicken's head to run around and play chicken head ball with, right? So poor chicken, right? Well, clearly you're going to eat the chicken too. It's not going to throw out the chicken. You're going to eat it anyway. It's going to be killed anyway. And then it's on Shabbos. So on Shabbos, the kids need to play with something on Shabbos, right? So what's the problem? The problem is that you're certainly unquestionably going to kill the chicken by removing its head from its shoulders. If chickens have shoulders, I don't know. So if there's an absolute and certain result, even though you did not want that result, then that would be a prohibited action. So back to the tempering would be a devar she'eino mitkaven. It would be something a possible result that he did not intend, and would therefore permitted. Matkif la Abaye. Mider mecham shepina mimenu mayim katane. Are we talking about an urn filled with hot water where the water was dumped out of the urn? No. Mecham shepinahu katane. They're talking about an urn filled with hot water that was taken off of the heat. It was taken off of the oven or the hot plate. Amar Abaye hachi kamar. They didn't have hot plates back then. modernizing the Talmud. Some people feel a need to do. Okay, so anyhow, so Elamar Abaya Hachikamar. Abaya says, no, it's like this. This is the way to say it. Hamecham shepinahu v'yesh bo mayim chamim lo yiten letocho mayim muatim b'shvil sheyuchamu aval noten letocho mayim murubim kedei l'havshiram. So read it like this: a hot water urn filled with hot water that had been removed. And from the heat, and it still has hot water in it. Do not place a little bit of water in it in order for that little bit of water to heat up, but rather you may place a lot of water in it in order to make the water tepid. A lot of cold water in to bring down the temperature of the water a bit. The mecham, bring up the temperature of the water a little bit. Sorry. So amecham shepina mimenu mayim lo yiten betocho mayim kol ikar. However, if the hot water urn, the hot water had been dumped out, and you used to have hot metal as a result, lo yiten betocho mayim kol ikar. You can't put water in it whatsoever, because that would cause the metal to temper. Rabbi Yehuda, this is a teaching of Rabbi Yehuda. To Amar davar she'en mitkaven asur, and it follows the teaching of Rabbi Yehuda, who said that if an unintended action, possibly unintended action, is actually forbidden. Amar Rav. So, according to the halacha, davar she'en mitkaven. The new understanding here, what's the chidush? It's that it's possible to think that this kind of tempering of the metal, even though it's an unintended result, it's a kind of sikresha, that it's a certainty that it would happen. But in this case, and in such a case, even Rabbi Shimon would agree that it's forbidden. Rabbi Shimon says that davar she'einu mitkaven was a possible resulting action that is permitted. But Rabbi Shimon agrees that if it's a psik resha, like cutting the chicken's head off, that you just want to play with the chicken's head, you, or if you are a kid, for your kids or for some kind of chicken lover, then there's a certainty that the chicken will die. Rabbi Shimon agrees that psik resha is forbidden. Therefore, this teaching comes to let us know that Rabbi Shimon holds that in this case it's not actually tempering the metal, not a certainty. It won't certainly temper the metal. It might not. That's the Rav. Amar Rav, lo shanu ela lahafshir ela l'tzaref asur. So Rav said it's taught that it's permitted to raise the temperature of the water a little bit, make it lukewarm, but clearly to temper the metal is forbidden. Shmuel amar afilu l'tzaref nami mutar. According to Shmuel, to temper the metal is actually permitted. L'tzaref l'chatchila mishari. Hey, whoever ab initio permitted tempering metal on Shabbos, but rather say it this way. If you're going to say such a thing, say it this way so as not to confuse people. Amar Rav, lo shanu ela shi'ur lahafshir. Rav said, it's only we're talking about a certain amount that will simply raise the temperature of the water a bit, of the cold water to lukewarm. Aval shi'ur l'tzaref asur. But if we're talking about a larger amount of water, a little bit of water is fine. A larger amount of water, when you temper metal, you use a lot of cold water. So using a lot of cold water, that would be a certain amount generally used to temper, and that would be forbidden. So Shmuel Amar afilu shi'ur l'tzaref. Shmuel said that even a large amount of water, enough to temper the metal, would be permitted. There's some great big huge Tosfos is here, which we won't get into now, Bli Neder another time, or perhaps not at all.